Still trying to process the Geno Smith trade to the Raiders. Chip Kelly and Geno Smith going to run some offense in Vegas. I love football. I freaking love it. But I'll miss Geno as a Seahawk fan. I'm still trying to make sense of it. I hope the Darnold stuff's real, and maybe they use that third rounder they got back in the draft. Max Torres does just a phenomenal job talking Duck football, Duck recruiting, all things Oregon, and just started a new venture semi-recently with On3 Sports and ScoopDuck. Let's bring up Max now. Max, great to see you. Thanks for making time, and let the people know, if they don't know already, kind of your new venture with On3.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate you guys having me on here this afternoon. Yeah, went over to On3, back to ScoopDuck, actually, where I got my start in this whole sports writing deal back in April. So coming up on the 1 year anniversary over with the folks at On3, and just trying to continue elevating, keep growing the podcast as well, and just covering these Ducks as well as I possibly can.
I'll put you on the spot, and you sound great, by the way. I always love when we bring on Max because he joins over Google Meet, and most radio guests are on the phone, but Max, you sound phenomenal. So thanks for doing the Google Meet stuff. It's fantastic. I'll put you on the spot with this because of the news that broke. What do you think of a Chip Kelly offense back in the NFL with Geno Smith running it?
It sounds a little wild just with all the movement that we've seen this offseason. Even crazier for me because I saw Pete Carroll when I was in Hawaii last summer, and I thought he was the only one that could save USC, but now he's in Vegas. So it's a wild development, and I think that Chip Kelly has shown that he knows how to scheme up an offense and was incredible in Columbus. So we'll see if he can get things running with the Raiders. It's been rough sailing out there. So I'm kind of pulling for them as a team that used to be in the Bay Area where I'm from. So let's see if they can get things rocking in Vegas.
Just wild. And then Darnold might go to Seattle and all of it. We'll see. But as a Seahawks fan myself, I'm still kind of processing it. The news of the week, I mean, it was a busy news week for Oregon. So Dan Lanning gets, are we calling it a new deal, as opposed to like a regular extension or all that? I mean, essentially it's an extension, but it's relatively a new deal, 6 years going through 2030 max and $11 million a year. It's a lot of cash, and deservedly so. You broke this, you reported it right on it when it happened. It was officially announced today by the university, in addition to extensions for Tosh and Will Stein that I'll ask you about. But your initial impression of Dan getting the big extension?
I think it's a great move. I don't know how an Oregon fan can look at this as anything but positive. And I was talking with Justin Hopkins on my podcast about this move just a couple days ago. And I think he made a good point when he mentioned that you're not in a situation now, if you're Rob Mullins, where you have to wait for a big school that has an opening in the coaching carousel and they come calling with a huge number. And you're like, oh man, now we have to match that or exceed it, right? You're setting the bar yourself and kind of getting out ahead of all of this. And the buyout remains the same from what I've been able to tell, around $20 million. So that both sides, Lanning and Oregon, continue to show that they're committed to each other. And it's really got to be a breath of fresh air if you're a Duck fan, because stability, I've been talking about it since it happened, stability at the top of your program in today's era of college football is just getting harder and harder to grab. It feels like it slipped through Oregon's fingertips a couple times, at least in my lifetime, in my time covering the Ducks. So great that the Ducks have their man, and he looks like he wants to stick around.
Lanning always holds himself accountable, holds himself to a high standard. Does the money now that he's like a top 5 coach paid in the nation, does that put more pressure on Oregon to win college football playoff games, not just the Big Ten? Like it was a big season, 13-0. You win the Big Ten your first year, but then you roll out and you look bad in the Ohio State Rose Bowl game. Is there much more pressure now on Oregon to win a couple of these college football playoff games now that Dan Lanning's a top 5 paid coach?
I can see why someone would say that, but I don't think I would necessarily say that myself. I don't think that that's the case. I mean, is it now a situation where because Dan Lanning's a top 5 paid coach in the sport that now we're saying Oregon's heavily invested in football? I don't think that that's the situation. There's always been a tremendous amount of investment in Oregon football. obviously with their relationship with Nike and just the way that everything's just rolling out there in Eugene. I think there's always been a pressure or an expectation to win a playoff game, something that the Ducks haven't done since the debut season of the college football playoff back in 2014. I remember I was at that game when they played Florida State, and Marcus Mariota and the Ducks felt like they could do no wrong. Just polar opposite of this most recent Rose Bowl that I'm sure Duck fans will want to forget here. So long answer to that. I don't think there's necessarily more pressure. I'd say it's probably the same. If anything, I think the expectations just continue to grow because you are leveling up your investment.
There's some reporting out there, too, that, the buyout staying the same as you mentioned earlier at about that $20 million number. That's favorable to Oregon, right? They don't want this guy, obviously, signing him to the big deal, and they don't want him to go. But it doesn't sound like Dan balked much at that anyway. I know Duck fans, by and large, rightfully so, there's still some PTSD out there from coaches that have success and leave. I get it, but I don't know, Max. As time goes by and we keep getting data points like this, I think it's time to believe Dan Lanning that he is all bought in for not just one, not just two. Now I sound like LeBron in Miami, but a lot of years to stay in the green grass that's Eugene.
Sure, and it seems like. Yeah, you put it best, the PTSD that I'm sure some Duck fans feel. It's like, okay, I want to believe it. I want to believe it. Is it time to believe it? And give Lanning credit. He's done nothing to make fans think that his mind is elsewhere. This isn't a guy that went to a big time college, right? Didn't go to Miami, didn't have a Florida State dream job like Taggart and Cristobal did. He's a William Jewell College guy, and he's done everything. He's said all the right things. So we're just a little over a year when he posted that epic video saying, I want to be here as long as Eugene will have me, and made him built on that to make it a recruiting pitch saying, if you're worried that your head coach is leaving, come play for us, or something along those lines. Right. So I had to give that one a watch again after this contract extension.
He's really good on socials, I got to say. Obviously, he's a phenomenal recruiter, and that's probably, reason number one why it's so easy to lock him up long term. The transfer portal success, I think, is one of those reasons as well. I still have my questions, Max, about him as a X&O game planner in the biggest spotlights. That might be, a pretty narrow pathway of critique because we're talking about a smaller sample size there, but they are glaring, right? The Ohio State game is the biggest example. I don't think the Penn State game was great defensively either. Obviously there was a big play at the end that saved it, but I think there's some stuff to do there. I wanted to ask you, though, also about Tosh. Tosh got this extension or another, contract for him as well, and Will Stein. What do you make of those two? They're different kind of conversations. And I'll guess start with Tosh. How do you kind of evaluate his role into this Dan Lanning staff right now? Because his recruiting prowess is impeccable. I know you can speak more to that. And what else does he kind of bring that makes him so valuable on this staff?
I think another thing that Tosh brings that makes him valuable on this Oregon staff is just energy, aura, mentality, experience too. He's coached a lot of really high level guys. You look at one of the best edge rushers in the NFL right now, Myles Garrett, who could land with my 49ers. That's probably a pipe dream. But
I don't want to see that. As a Seahawks fan, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Robert Saleh with a D-line that includes Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, and maybe Joey Bosa too, because he's a free agent as well. But go ahead.
Yeah, the point is that Tosh has worked with some really high-level players, and I think now with a guy like Jordan Burch going to the NFL, Derek Harmon going to the NFL, Mateo is next in line, not too far behind. Tatum's doing a great job. Like his resume continues to speak for itself. Obviously, it's not just him, but I think he's been a tremendous addition to this coaching staff, and it really felt to me that when he was hired by Dan Lanning, I knew all about him. I was like, wow, it does feel like it's kind of a perfect time, perfect storm for him to finally make his way out to Eugene, because he's one of the very best recruiters in all of college football and certainly on the West Coast. So he continues to be really, really valuable, and the arrow is pointing way up on the recruiting trail and on the field with the defense that they've been building.
I'll ask you about Will Stein here as well. So Will, being probably the top-ranking offensive guy on the ball, I was kind of curious to see what his head coaching prospects would look like elsewhere. this past offseason. You're talking about a guy that's led offenses, that's put the quarterback in New York at the end of the year 2 years in a row. What do you make of Will Stein not only being in Eugene, but obviously getting a little pay bump here as well, and what his kind of future is like? What's he like as a recruiter? What do people say about him?
Yeah, well, Will Stein has also been a tremendous addition. It really feels like Dan Lanning has, I don't know if I'd say captured lightning in a bottle, but he's aced both of his offensive coordinators. And since he's been at Oregon, obviously starting off with Kenny Dillingham and then going over to Texas to hire a relatively, I don't know if I'd say unknown, that's probably unfair to say, but a lesser known coach for sure in Will Stein. And he's been tremendous. So I think that for him as a recruiter, he's just a guy that is, he's a younger coach. I think he's a hit with recruits. He's been crucial to Oregon's recruiting the state of Texas, which of course kind of got shifted into higher gear when Rashad Samples came over. We know about his ties, of course, to Duncanville, one of the best programs in the state, and home to Decorian Moore, the receiver that everybody's talking about now, getting his college start at Oregon. So I think that he is maybe somebody that probably isn't talked about enough when it comes to the world of Oregon recruiting. You have Lanning, you have Tosh, who we just talked about. Chris Hampton is someone that is right there in the thick of it for one of the best recruiters on this staff. But Will Stein is a guy that kind of just gets talked about as a QB whisperer of sorts. The top quarterbacks in the country, whether they're at the high school level or in more recent years at the transfer portal level as well, everyone sees what Will Stein is doing with these quarterbacks in Oregon, and that's why the Ducks are having no problem finding top passers to come play for them.
You talk about Will Stein being that quarterback whisperer that he is. Speaking of the next quarterback, Dante Moore, he's getting a lot of hype already without really playing too much in the Oregon system with Will Stein. We saw what he did at UCLA as a true freshman, but what are your expectations for Dante Moore next season under Will Stein of year two of Dante Moore learning from him?
Yeah, it feels like sky is the limit for Dante Moore. I think the reason I'm so excited about him dates back even to last year when we hardly saw him at all. I was just excited about him because if we did see him last year, we knew it was kind of going to be in a backup fashion, right? But he was at the time, he was the most experienced backup that Oregon has had in I don't know how long, because it's just so hard to get two experienced quality passers in the same quarterback room now. But he's a guy that I saw coming out of high school at the Adidas All-American Bowl in San Antonio. And I remember he had flipped and signed with UCLA, and I was just sitting there like, my God, this guy's arm talent is crazy. I think he won MVP honors. I have to go back and double check that, but the talent absolutely jumped off the page. I don't think he's necessarily this jaw-dropping athlete, but he's just a guy that gets it done. I don't think he's got crazy speed, but he's got more maybe that NFL mobility in the pocket where you can extend plays the right way and just be slippery in the pocket, moving around. The arm talent is certainly what I think pops out the most to me. And also I think part of the excitement is just the aura around Dante. He's that calm, cool, collected guy, not going to talk a lot, but he also has to, obviously, because he's a quarterback and he's leading the offense. But I can't say enough good things about him, even though I haven't really gotten to interview him too many times. But the fact that he came to Oregon in the way that he did, I think just speaks tremendous, volumes to his character. And just the talent that he's going to have to work with makes it hard not to be excited about what the Ducks can accomplish in 2025 and why it's not hard to see why people think he might have a higher ceiling than Dylan Gabriel did. And he was a Heisman finalist.
Obviously, the supporting cast has something to do with that as well. We're talking to Max Torres on 3 Sports and ScoopDuck, joining us on the Bald-Faced Truth. Judah Newby and Stephen Vaughn in for John Canzanon. And Junior Adams goes to the Dallas Cowboys. And what he did as wide receivers coach kind of speaks for itself with the emergence of a number of guys, including Tez Johnson most recently. Ross Douglas is the replacement, comes over from Syracuse, and you've been tweeting about him and his work recently as well. What did the Ducks get in Ross Douglas and the outlook of the receiver position as a result?
They got another young, up-and-coming coach, and I think the biggest bullet you look at is his NFL experience, right? Coming from the Patriots, and maybe you look at that and say to yourself, well, the Patriots haven't been doing so hot in the past couple of years, but that's still NFL experience. He was, I think he was with Bill Belichick for at least one of those years, I want to say. But at the end of the day, that's NFL experience. That's valuable. That's going to resonate with recruits because that's where they're trying to get at the end of the day. And he's a guy that really helped Syracuse run the numbers up in the Fran Brown system. I'm really excited about the Orange just long term because I like Fran Brown's energy. They were really tossing the ball all over the yard last year. Believe they had the top passing offense in the country, so that's kind of what people were really latching on to when Ross Douglas got hired. But I'm still trying to learn a little bit more about him. I'm excited to see the impact he can have on the recruiting trail as an Ohio native. It looks like they're having a little bit of a increased effort, ramped up effort in the Midwest. And he's got some big guys that he's already going after here in the 2026 class. Chris Henry Jr., the Ohio State commit, Caden Dixon-Wyatt, another guy I see quite a bit down here in Southern California. And then another guy that I think is interesting to watch here is Messiah Hampton out of the state of New York. He was the On3 MVP at the Under Armour Miami camp. So he's really putting on for the state of New York, and he's got a relationship with Ross Douglas that goes back to his time at Syracuse. So it's going to be exciting. Another young coach that Lanning tabbed as someone he sees a lot of potential in.
You talk about all the young coaches, Tosh Lupoi, 43, Will Stein, I believe, 35. Dan Lanning, young as well, 38. I know it's great to have a lot of good young talent as the coaching staff, but in that Ohio State game, I keep going back to they got outcoached in that one. With all the experience that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day had, did the Ducks need to bring in some X and O's guy or some analyst or some guy that can help out these young coaches in these big spots?
I think it would certainly help, and I think the critique is warranted, right? You look at a guy like Mike Cavanaugh, who was hired away by Oregon State last year. He made a huge impact on the success that Alik Terry and the rest of the offensive line was able to have, especially with Terry being a younger coach himself, but he's proven that he is a stud. So when you have a result like that, I think it makes sense that you ask that question. Do you need some more experience on that coaching staff? I think you also have to look at it through the lens of Lanning hasn't necessarily been there before as a head coach. So he's learning some of these lessons as he goes. There's growing pains. I'm not trying to make excuses for him. I just think that's another thing that is worth bringing to the table in the conversation. And I think that Lanning's been a guy that's been pretty humble and can recognize where he needs to grow. So I don't think I would put it past him to maybe bring in a guy that is a bit more experienced, because you're right, Stephen, it is a younger staff at the end of the day.
This is the one thing I worry about, man. I love Dan Lanning as a recruiter, but I'm with Judah. I don't know if the X and O's thing is quite there with rating. But Max, thank you for joining us. Max Torres on 3 Sports, covering the Ducks. Go follow him on all the socials, man. And we will catch up with you later, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.